Right now, I'd like to go ahead and call up Dr. Milgram to give us his 5-minute presentation, then we'll have Q&A. Make sure that he's got that mic on there. Yeah, they're coming to help you there. Thank you, sir.
Okay. I don't have much volume, so I'm going to start out by taking my prepared testimony and going through it. My understanding is that the purpose of this part of the meeting is to consider removing the process standards from the text. Is that right?
I mean, no, we haven't really put, we have something that we have considered, but there, anything can be considered at this point. I mean, we're talking about we haven't made any specific decisions.
Okay. Well, I would like to talk about the process standards. So let me just discuss a little bit about what the issues are in removing them or not removing them. So one of the main reasons these standards need to go, and there's really a real problem here, is a matter of law. It is illegal in Texas to have any of the Common Core standards in the Texas standards. Now, these process standards are basically, they're a lot less wordy than the process standards, the 7 process standards in the Common Core, but they cover the same material in the same order. They just take out a lot of the words. And the trouble is that in Common Core, those words, mathematicians actually, when they look at the process standards in Common Core, they say, well, they're not completely horrible. And that, the point is that the mathematicians actually wrote much of the Common Core process standards, but you've taken out those words. So you've got process standards which are the same as Common Core, same order, but not even as good as Common Core's process standards. And Common Core's process standards are the heart of the problems with Common Core. So that's the first thing, that as a matter of law, you probably have to remove them. But there are other reasons for getting rid of them. If you look through your standards, then you will see that virtually every standard, all the way through K through 12, starts with the following phrase: the student applies mathematical process standards to, and then a topic is listed. And then after that are a bunch of substandards. And so every single standard asserts that the content of that standard is built from the process standards. That the process standards dominate every section of math that a student will learn in K-12. So they are the very heart of mathematics, the people who are responsible for them would say, and they are so powerful that they make it possible for students to derive any specific mathematics they might need directly from them. The problem is that neither of those two statements is remotely true. In fact, an actual mathematician such as myself would regard them as, at best, pre-mathematics. The kind of material an early human would be aware of and would, with effort, apply to pre-mathematical things like correctly counting various objects. Very little more than that. Just look at a few of them. Apply mathematics to problems arising in everyday life, society, and the workplace. That's content-free. Create and use representations to organize, record, and communicate mathematical ideas. Basically, count and tell people what the answer is. And the others are longer. I won't go through those. But this is the level at which they're written, and this is the what they do. So so now we look at them, and as I've indicated, they're really deeply embedded. They're everywhere in the standards. What I've done for the board is I've given you two handouts. One handout is an analysis of your first grade standards and what they would look like if you remove the process standards. And the other is fourth grade. And let's look briefly at the first grade standards. You see that there's a lot of words in there. They're a fairly long collection of standards, the first grade Texas standards. But when I remove the process standards and the material attached to them, the standards are cut by 2/3. And when you take that what's left over and put it together and look at it, you find a situation where those are pure math. Those are just topics that the kids are supposed to learn, and they're way weaker than even your average state. Now, to see what first grade should look like, I've also included copies of the California standards, the old ones, the ones I wrote. And you can look at that and you can compare them, and you can see that all sorts of basic key standards are simply missing, the actual math. For example, one critical standard in first grade is memorize the addition table for single-digit numbers. And it's not there in the Texas standards. And you have a similar situation, the same treatment with the fourth grade. And so these are things you need to think about. I guess that was 5 minutes, right? Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Milgram. Appreciate it. Questions for Dr. Milgram? Yes, Ms. Cargill.
Oh, Dr. Milgram, thank you for making the trip. I'm glad to see you're feeling better than in September. Could you, I'm still trying to understand this. Could you explain or just review for us how the process standards, how do they control the delivery of the content? I mean, because they're not in every single student expectation, but how,
well, they
those
are.
that do have it, how do they control it?
Well, virtually every single one of your main standards, you have, like in the way the thing is written in first grade, is there are 9 total standards. The first standard is the process standard.
Yeah.
That's true in all grades.
Right.
The second standard is the first actual standard. Every single one of those standards that follow says the students will use the process standards too. And then within each individual substandard, there are pieces there that tie into the process standards, basically saying how the teacher will use the process standards to have the kids understand this topic. So this is a deep embedding.
Dr. Milgram, you said that Texas standards are below that of almost every other state. Can you explain why we have the high NAEP scores that we just were?
Oh, really?
Yes.
Well, I happen to know your NAEP scores.
Yeah.
And the important ones are the ones in 8th and 12th grade. And they've fallen apart.
But you were just condemning the whole program, the first and fourth grade. And
It's too soon in 4th grade to see the results. But problems that you were having that are embedded in what you were doing, that we tried 20 years ago, we tried very much to change a lot of things in Texas, and we weren't able to succeed. Things that you were doing, what they had done to your outcomes was, in the early grades, you did very, very well. And then they fell apart in 8th grade, and by the end of 12th grade, they were really very low indeed. And that has not changed. And in fact, with the recent NAEP scores, it's gotten worse.
We haven't seen that.
Yes, Ms. Hardy, and you did, and then Ms. Mount Malone. She had hers up first.
Thank you, Dr. Mills, for being here. I have a kind of a two-part question.
Is your mic on?
There. I have kind of a two-part question. If we should remove those process standards, how will that affect the teachers? And the second part is, how will it affect our STAR test?
Well, I mean, it'll have a dramatic effect. There's no question about that. The question that I would ask is whether that's a good effect or a bad effect. And what I would say is this, that understanding the actual weakness of the standards, that is when you tear out these process standards, you see so little is left. That's something that's well worth understanding and well worth changing. Right now, I don't think you can do that, right? So you're kind of stuck with what you're teaching. But at least what would happen if you take the process standards out is the inordinate amount of time the teachers are required to handle process standards could be devoted to the limited subject matter that actually is present.
What about the STAR test? How do you think it might affect that?
How do I think it might affect that? I really have no idea. When I worked on the STAR test with Texas, it was a number of years ago, and what I tried to do was to have them put in questions that broke apart the processes. So, like, where the issue is, they want to know, that's one of the things they want to know on that kind of test is, do the kids understand the process of multiplication, say using standard algorithm or anything else? Do they understand it? And so what I wanted them to do was to put in questions like that, well, there are two things that actually matter here. There are two processes that the kids should be skilled at. The first is multiplying an arbitrary number by a single digit number, and the second is multiplying by 10 or a power of 10. And so I wanted to see questions like that, which at least when I was working on it initially, nothing like that was present.
Thank you.
Question, Dr. Milgram, and thank you for your coming and your presentation. Just a little bit more about process standards. I'm trying to learn about them. In other words, have we always had them, and why are they suddenly so important?
Okay, if you use the regular English interpretation of the word process and standards, then process standards we would have always had, because they involve understanding what you're doing when you're doing processes, like multiplication, or addition, or division, or in algebra, working with equations and solving, all of those. These are processes in ordinary English. But the process standards don't recognize those as processes. They sort of, as I said, these are pre-mathematics kind of processes. These are the things that you should take totally for granted. Does that help?
It helps.
Yeah, so yes, the answer is that if you use the proper definition of process standards, then yes, you've always had them. But they aren't what the process standards are now. If you use today's definition, they're completely different.
Well, what's confusing is that apparently there are several processes to get to the answer, and there are several ways to get to the answer. So how do you?
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, in mathematics, we don't care what way you get to an answer. We care if it's correct or not. And we care if it's provably correct. So whatever way gets to a correct answer is fine.
Well, but some of the kids are getting scored even if they get to the right answer, they get scored against the process because they didn't use.
Yes, against the process, and that's the trouble.
And that's it.
Yeah.
All right.
The teachers are somehow told that there is the process. Like, if you don't follow the process, you don't get credit.
Yeah.
Well, there isn't the process. In doing multiplication, there are many ways and many choices that you can make. It doesn't matter to me, it doesn't matter to anybody who's rational about it. Does the child do the work correctly? That's all that matters.
So by pulling out, so is it logical to pull the process standards out?
Well, since they're flawed, since they're
flawed.
badly flawed, yes, it's logical.
Mr. Rowley?
To springboard off of that. Now, thank you. Well, to springboard off of that, Dr. Milgram, what you just said, yes, they're fatally flawed. Yes, they should be taken out. But if I heard your earlier testimony said the problem is if we take them out, then what's left are much weaker than even the average state.
No. I'm sorry. I said that taking them out reveals the fact that the actual content is very weak.
Okay, well, I think we're saying the same thing. And so my question.
Hopefully.
Well, I don't know. I'll
Yes.
find out. So where that leaves us, it seems, is that that if we remove the process standards as you advocate, then we have a weak set of standards that are left.
Well, no. You have a weak set of standards, but the process standards hide the fact.
Well, again, I think we're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
And so, but this may not be your concern as much as it is ours, because we've got to come up with a set of standards. And so, are you advocating then, if you were sitting in our chair, a massive rewrite?
I'm saying that, yes, that is certainly something I would very much like to see, but you have rules that you have to follow. I understand that. So I don't think that's in the cards.
So can you give us some help then as to what?
In any way that I could, I would. So if you can tell me what the possibilities are, I could try to evaluate what the most likely ones to work would be.
Okay, I understand that. So your conclusion is that the process standards should not be left in because that's problematic. But if we were to go through and take all the process standards out, then we're left with a weak set of standards. I mean, is that?
It's
essentially
left.
what
You're
you're
left
saying?
with something that is visibly weak, whereas with the process standards in there, it's so confusing to figure out what is and what isn't there.
Yeah, your position, it's disguised as weak,
Exactly.
but it's still weak.
It's disguised, but it's still weak, and so yeah. So that's my position. And,
Okay, and so a rewrite, it sounds like it would be about all that's left to be done.
If it were possible to do the rewrite, that would really be your best choice. And,
Okay.
And there are a number of really first-class mathematicians within the state university system here in Texas who would be glad to help.
Okay.
Now, frankly, I'm going to put a proviso on that. There are also mathematicians within the math departments who have very, very close relationships with the schools of education. Be very careful about these people.
Okay, so we need to rewrite, but we need to be careful who we select to rewrite.
Yes.
Okay, all right, thanks. Thank you for being here, by the way, and going through the trouble and the effort to be here. We appreciate that.
Mr. Ratliff?
Thank you for traveling to be with us today. I want to go in somewhat of a different direction. Your comment about the standards that we have that mimic the Common Core should be removed. Am I remembering that right?
Well, I don't mimic I'd say the process standards are a special deal. I mean, the process standards, you want to look at them in terms of the way they interact with the mathematics and what they do for it. And it turns out that although the process standards, so-called in Common Core, are technically better in terms of how they interact with actual mathematics, neither the process standards in Common Core nor the process standards in Texas are interpreted in that way. Rather, they're interpreted in the way I tried to indicate, where they sit over actual mathematics and control it, and everything is constructed from it. But I also tried to say that the only everythings that can be constructed from it are the kind of math that cavemen would have done 5,000 years ago.
Well, and I hope you would agree with me that if we hear quite often that Common Core is illegal in Texas, which it is, and we hear that our standards look like Common Core or are Common Core, and that they ought to be removed from our standards.
Well, pieces of it look like Common Core.
Well, and so to that end, I pulled up for the first time in my life the Common Core math standards. And yes, I have it on my iPad. Nobody tell the Attorney General. And let me just start with the very first one, kindergarten. Count to 100 by ones and tens.
Yeah.
Because that's in Common Core, we can't not have it in ours.
No, of course not. That's actual mathematics.
And exactly. And so my challenge is, and my frustration is, we keep getting told this is Common Core, so you can't use it. But if we took everything out of our standards that are in Common Core, the teachers would sit in math class and look at their children.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree, but there's a difference between meta standards, if you want to call them that, from the philosophical point of view, and standards. And the process standards are meta standards. Now, and those standards have well, first of all, it is impossible to create meta standards within standard logic that will create and override all of mathematics. That's simply not going to happen. And so you have meta standards here that claim to do just that.
Do you believe?
And so Common Core also has meta standards that don't quite claim that in the document itself, they do not quite claim that they're meta standards, the process standards that they have recreate and do all of mathematics, but what they do claim is that it is the interface between mathematics and the rest of the world.
Do you believe that if we were to interpret literally the state law that says Common Core may not be used, that it would absolutely gut our math standards?
Well, your math what I understand by math standards are already gutted.
That's not my question. If we went through and printed out the Common Core math standards and took all of those and said none of these can be in our standards, what would be left?
Quite a bit. But it would almost all be in the high school level, because the one place where you actually have not horrible standards, pretty good, above average, in fact, standards, is in high school.
But if we gut K through 8, we're not going to do very well in high school.
Well, I'm not going to argue with you. You're setting up a situation which is, I'm sure somebody can get around. Phraseology issues are here.
Right. And that's my concern is I have not found a member of the board that supports using the Common Core standards for our standards in our classrooms, in our board meetings, anywhere. What I've come to understand because of experts like you that say there are certain fundamental truths in math that must be taught.
Yes.
And so if those happen to be in Common Core and happen to be in ours, we can't take them out or we're not teaching our kids fundamental truths of math.
Believe me, I'm not arguing with you about that. I am saying that there are certain things that are not mathematics that are in Common Core, namely their process standards, that are mirrored far too closely by you, because the same errors that are in their process standards are being reflected in yours.
And you and I will agree that if there are flaws with some of our standards, we ought to address those flaws in our standards. My concern is if we use the Common Core as the reason for taking them out, then we go down a path where there's nothing left.
Well, you go down a path where the verbal problems may be significant. Yes, I can see this. I can see this. I'm not going to deny that.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Maynard,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
hard to wait your turn, I get it.
I know. Well, Dr. Milgram, I certainly had heard your name bantered around a lot, and your legend precedes you. Now, is my understanding that you were involved were you involved in the 2012 development of the current standards?
Yes.
Okay. And so I was not here at the time, and so my challenge is just to try to understand how we got here. And if you could, I've got a couple of questions in that regard. Is that at least it's my understanding that the standards that we have in terms of the content, in terms of the knowledge and skill statements, that those were developed, but the process standards were something that were added in relatively late in the process. What is your recollection of how that came to be, and what was
Let's put it this way. I was in charge of the group of mathematicians, national mathematicians, that were overseeing the national end of this process back in 2010. And what had happened was, so in October of 2010, they sent us the first draft of these new standards, and we looked at them, and there were lots of problems, but there was a lot of stuff that looked promising, and so we put together a fairly detailed list of corrections that needed to be made, and we sent that back to the TEA. And then we got, in February, we got a revised version, and they'd made almost every one of the corrections that they'd asked for. And now we could see, okay, they're all the type of problems that remained just were verbal kind of problems with a lack of clarity in the individual paragraphs and phrases and the things that you could handle in a much more routine manner. And we put together again a list of here are the ways you ought to phrase these things so they're clearer and more precise. And we assumed that based on what had happened with the first draft versus second, that they were going to just take care of that, and it was clear that resulting document would have been pretty darn good. I would have even regarded it as among the very best in the country. That's not what happened. What happened was the next set of standards, which I think I got in July of 2011, they were awful. They were really, really bad. And so I complained, and the person who was heading this thing up, I guess her name was Everly Broadway, called me up sounding frankly very nervous, and said, trying to understand what my objections were. And we got into a long discussion. She must have been on the phone with me for a couple hours. And I assumed that I had made it clear to her what our perspective was on the changes that had been made in TEA, from the second draft to this semi-final draft, it turned out. And I never got another draft. I never saw another version, but what must have been how long ago, when did the teachers get together? Was 2012. So late in 2011, maybe early in 2012, I got notified that I was invited along with the other national people. We were invited to attend and help out at the teacher session. And I was, by that point, kind of dubious about the whole thing, because they should have copied me on whatever the heck changes they had made, and they never did. And so I said, no, I'm not going. But at least one of us went, Dick Askey, and he worked very hard with the teachers groups. He worked. Nikki Hayes here was in one of the groups he worked with, and he wrote me back a very gloomy letter. And I felt that I probably made the right decision.
So, what is your understanding in terms of the origin of the process standards? You mentioned that some iteration of them exists in the Common Core standards.
Well, they hadn't existed in the first two drafts that I looked at.
Right. Yeah, but I mean, just the.
And they were starting to appear but they weren't really dominant in that semifinal one in July of 11. But there was this dramatic change between then and what actually finally came out, where these process standards suddenly were absolutely dominant.
But the process standards that exist in Common Core,
they existed as there have been no change in Common Core. That it came out in early 2010, and there's been no change.
Yeah. So what is your understanding as to what the origin of those process standards are, and what is the intent of them?
Okay. Well. The first time process standards like that appeared was in the 1989 NCTM standards, National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. And the math community, the professional math community was very, very upset by that, because they were focusing in on what we felt were the wrong aspects of learning, and we didn't believe that students would come out of the NCTM approach with the kind of expertise that would be needed at the college level. The automaticity in terms of calculation, for example, was suppressed, and it isn't that it's useful in and of itself, but it's critical in terms of brain research that you realize that once students get into things like calculus and things like that, they do not have the time to count on their fingers or anything like that. That had better be automatic. And so you were getting students who coming out of the NCTM standard style in the 90s who were not remotely automatic and couldn't go on past calculus because they just didn't have the background. So the first thing we did in California in the late 90s when we got rid of NCTM standards and wrote our own was to get rid of all of that type of thing, all of the kind of thing, the so-called process standards that were present in NCTM. We just got rid of them because we did not think they were helpful. Now they got put back for NCT from NCTM, they got put back in Common Core. And at least they did this. So exactly what the problems were unchanged. They were using the same things. But I had just solved a fairly major problem about that time in protein folding. And so they, they finally asked me a reasonable question. What was the process? Because after all, protein folding is biology. And I'm a mathematician. So I'm taking my math expertise and applying it. And what was the process that you used, they asked me, to find a result like this in in a field that you don't know? So in other words, how does one apply mathematics? What are the processes you go through with to apply it? And so I answered them in great detail, and a lot of that answer appears in the detailed discussion in the Common Core process standards.
So, the way I understand it then, is that how it was explained to us is that the idea of the process standards was to teach mathematics from a conceptual viewpoint, and for students that we know that, and I spent enough time in the classroom, and I was a teacher, that there are certain students that naturally tend to have a stronger capacity for mathematical reason than are others. And the idea was then is that if you teach it from a conceptual viewpoint where students can really understand these things, and that these process standards would help them to do that. So tell me what is the flaw? I mean, and what I'm hearing is that there is a flaw in that line of reasoning. And can you tell me what that is?
I can, of course, but there is I'd hate, it would take quite a while, and
give me the Reader's Digest version.
Well, let me think about it for a second here. Okay, first thing one needs to know is a certain amount of study of these things has been done. A lot of those studies have never been published because what they showed was that the change in outcomes for students in terms of their ability to do basic mathematics were unchanged at best. And a lot of them showed that on average they got worse. But they were never published. For the simple reason that, well, if you've been a teacher, you are probably aware of the selectivity of the ed school journals. So in point of fact, there really isn't any research that shows these things do what they say they're going to do. Now you look at something else that doesn't obviously appear to be connected, but it is. And you look at the high achieving countries like Korea or the developed areas of China or Hong Kong, Singapore. All of these areas that really get remarkable results, and you ask, well, what about the kids, the weaker kids, the ones you were talking about originally, the ones that need remediation? And they look at you and they say, what? They don't have that problem. Their kids don't need remediation. They learn this stuff because they learn it in a totally different way than we teach it. They learn it from a modern perspective of mathematics. We are teaching it the same way it was taught 2,000 years ago. And the people in the high achieving countries are teaching it the way we did develop the thing in the new development of foundations for mathematics between about 1880 and 1920. So over that period of 40 years, we changed our perspectives on almost everything in the foundations, and that's what these kids are learning today in the high achieving country, and that's how they're learning. And it makes it so much cleaner that there will be problems. I mean, there are differences in ability, there just are, but they don't appear through grade 8. They simply don't appear.
And so what you're telling me is that using the process standards, whether they be in the Texas standards or the Common Core, is not consistent with brain research in terms of how students learn math.
That's among the things, yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Milgram, for being here today. And again, you were part of the, well, let me start where I'm going to end. What I'm hearing, what I'm summarizing, without the process standards, which tell us teachers how to do things, without those standards, our classroom educators can concentrate on teaching math and not process standards, right?
Yes.
And I'm going to start with that and end with that, because you wrote the process standards for the previous California math standards, which was considered the best in the nation. Is that true?
Well, we
Or you're part of that
rejected the process standards, and we wrote math reasoning standards, and instead of appearing at the beginning of every grade, they appeared at the end to give it clear indication that we don't worry about those.
So I remember when we started this process, I remember the board, we looked at what were the best. And the best at that time were California, Massachusetts, and Singapore. And with the commissioner then, I believe it was Commissioner Scott then, our goal was to look at the best and make sure that Texas in every case equaled that or exceeded that, which probably goes up to that document you said before the changes occurred. But the process standards, you said those occurred previously in '89, right?
Yes.
And the math experts, the true math experts rejected those, and they've come back again. So where I'm leading this is that one parent said, in the real world, it's what? It's speed and accuracy. It's not how the process. I think that's very close to what you opened your statement with.
Yeah, except I'm a little stronger than that. I don't think these process standards aren't really answers to the how.
Oh, okay. And then you stated at actually, probably clear as I've heard you said, I'm quoting, not on the spot, I'm sorry, you said, Common Core process standards are the heart of the problem of Common Core.
I certainly said that, yes.
And it's very key, because I don't want to confuse the Attorney General's opinion, who was then Greg Abbott, who's now our governor. But in his opinion, he said 2 + 2 = 4. That has nothing to do with Texas standards or math standards. That's always true. And Common Core has some of that stuff. If we take out anything that looks like Common Core, we have nothing left, because obviously there's things in there they've gotten from us and other states. So again, Attorney General Abbott said, be careful, 2 + 2 = 2. That doesn't mean it's Common Core. But we do know those process standards, which you said were '89 and came back again, which mathematicians argued against and came back later, those are clearly our Common Core.
Yes.
And, well, that's it. That's what I'm saying again. Then we're saying without the process standards, what do we have left? Again, making clear with the comment about anything that looks like Common Core is gone. Well, that's not quite true, because, again, 2 + 2 is not Common
Right.
Core.
You don't take the math out, because that precedes Common Core.
But we know the process standards are unique, and those are part of the problem.
Yes.
Because I want our educators to be able to teach math, and we talk always about a mile, what's the common, a mile wide, an inch deep, whatever. If we get rid of those process
Sounds about
standards,
right.
they can go back to teaching math in the classroom. I'm not trying to lead you in those comments, but I'm trying to summarize what you've said.
Yes, I mean, you're perfectly right. These are all things I've said at one point or another and haven't backtracked on.
Good. Thank you so much for being here today, sir.
Dr. Milgram, let's go back to our conversation a few minutes ago, because I've done some research. Texas never participated in the 12th grade scores, so that's why I couldn't respond to you on the 12th grade scores. But we did get our scores back on 4th and 8th grade, and we were above the national average, way above the national average, and our 4th grader, our 8th grade ranked 4th Hispanically in the nation, and our African American students ranked 6th in the nation. That Texas didn't participate in it, though. Yeah, I just got it from the our person on NAEP. So, seven states decided to participate, and they're reported out en masse. But we were not even one of the people that participated.
Let me see
Never.
I have the data, so let me find it. Ah. Okay. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, the thing I was studying was what do the national drop and the 2015 NAEP test scores really mean? And so where are the scores for Texas here? No, they're not in this one.
This is the 4th grade, and then this is the 8th grade.
We
Yeah.
don't have 12th grade, that's what he said.
Yeah, I don't have 12th
They don't have 12th grade.
grade. Right.
We got the 4th and 8th, and we did above the state national average.
Yeah, no, you wanna, right, so let's see now, Texas, yes, you wanna look at this. You see, you wanna look at the shape of that curve. Compare it to the.
But the thing about it is, when it was released, they said we did above the national average.
The curve is above, but look at the shape of the curve.
And what about the shape of the
The
curve?
shape of the curve, look at the steepness of the drop.
But that is nationally that's doing
No,
that.
no, the blue is national.
I know, but they're also doing the same thing.
But look at the steepness.
Okay, maybe we
I contend that
y'all
that has to
can
do with our
talk.
our math academies that we pulled out of about 6 years ago too.
Yeah.
So-
Okay, any other
Reading, I just wanted to.
Oh,
That'd be
okay,
great.
all right, so I'd forgotten a number of these details, but here they are, and this is even the correct data. That if you look at the curves, the national curve for the NAEP, and this is at 8th grade, looks like this with a drop here. And that drop, we believe, is influenced by Common Core. And it's the first drop that one has seen in like 40 years. Now, Texas has a more interesting curve. It goes well above the national average, and then it drops steeply down to basically the same point that the national thing does in 2015. So it goes like this, the national curve goes like that. Now, when you get a drop that's steep, the tangent, if you wish, is going like that rather than like this, that means something is really wrong.
Grade Solids doesn't. Where are those 12 pages? Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Perez.
So, Madam Chair, it's a little, I guess I was having a hard time following the testimony earlier because I kept getting conflicting information from you, Dr. Milgram. It's hard to interpret what you're talking about because I don't have anything physically in front of me. I'm a very visual person, so I don't have the chart you're talking about. But it seems like your interpretation of what's taken place is that there's some assumption that Common Core had something to do with the drop. However, I would also argue that one of the things that we've heard across the board from testifiers, actual practitioners in Texas, is that they're happy with the standards. The concern was the implementation, the very quick implementation, and so there was lack of, and that was the board's fault. The turnaround in making sure that these were going to be rolled out with enough time to provide the professional development for our practitioners. I think could you say that contributed to the drop and not Common Core?
I'm not even going to, nationally, wait, there's a distinction here, nationally or Texas.
She's talking about Texas. She's talking about
I'm
Texas.
speaking specifically about Texas.
But Texas doesn't have Common Core per se. Texas has Texas. So whatever you're seeing in Texas is Texas. And this is dramatic. From my perspective, the steepness of the slope is dramatic.
Yes, Ms. Cargo.
Dr. Milgram, you gave us a couple of handouts, and one was for first grade, and one was for fourth grade, I think. But I'd rather stick to first grade, because
Sure.
that'd be easier to understand for
Understood.
me. Could you just walk us through, you have down the grade 1 student expectations, and then you have a corrected standard, I think, where you've removed the process skills.
Right.
Could you just pick one example and
Sure.
help us to understand what these would look like if the process skills were taken out of
Okay, will do.
the content standards?
So let's see, let's take an early standard.
Members, you have this, it's grade 1.
So on page 2, let's look at page 2. Standard 2, numbers and operations. Okay, I first give you the entire standard with its 7 substandards, A through G, right? I give it verbatim, exactly as it appears in the document, in the Texas document. Then I give you the corrected standard. Now I've done 2 things there. I've removed all of the process standards, and I've removed the teaching instructions related to the process standards. And I find that and then I've corrected the mathematics and occasionally the English.
Okay.
And so we see a very long standard with an initial sentence, the initial paragraph that's 4 lines long, and then 7 substandards. And then I put the corrected one, which consists of a initial paragraph which is only 3 lines long, and then 3 substandards, nothing more, because that was all that was left after you got rid of the process standards and the other irrelevancies. Okay? Well now, okay, so now we could look maybe at standard 4, maybe, yeah, let's look at standard 4. Or better yet, let's look at standard 4. So standard 4 has 3 substandards attached to it, and then I put right below that I put just the corrected standard 4, which is just 2 standards, and they're short. And I look at the remaining standards, and I get the same kind of thing. Each time when I put in the correction, I get very few substandards, and they're quite short. So now, what I didn't do in this thing was to take those and separate them out and then write, okay, here's the math. But if I had, it would have been like this long, whereas the original one was like this long. And I could, but you know, I didn't do that in here to write it, but I looked at them and I put it all together in my head, and I said, oh, this math is missing all sorts of stuff. Now that I've cleared out the extraneous stuff, I can look and see what's really being done, and very, very little is being done. And then I said, okay, look, in order to understand how much is missing, what I did was I took, here are the first grade California standards from 1998 to 2010, the ones I wrote. And I was assuming kind of the people on the board could go through that line or paragraph by paragraph and then compare to the other. And I think that was probably idiotic, because you don't possibly have the time to do that. But in any case, if you were to do that, you would see that all sorts of obviously fundamental standards that deal with the math itself are simply not present in what's left of the Texas standards when you cut out all this stuff.
And so, there's a lot of conversation about, you know, the conceptual math. Has that been around in the past? Was it called something else? I mean, we've heard of fuzzy math and this and that math. I mean, is it?
Well,
does it come back-
I don't know
come
what,
back?
I don't even know what the term conceptual math means. Frankly, I mean, you know, for me, mathematics consists of statements that are provable from basic assumptions. So it consists of a sequence of provable statements that follow from a set of basic assumptions. And with careful assumptions and careful choices of the kind of statements you want to prove, you can create things that have lots of applications.
I heard from one teacher from a large school district, and she said the process students have helped our students, teachers, and parents see how our students are reasoning and thinking while they are completing their mathematics activities.
Oh, Jesus.
And I heard that quite a bit. Well, that's not the only one, you know, I mean, I've heard from a few other math teachers that are saying it's helping.
I've gone through state after state after state. When I testify in front of the legislature, the usual process is initially in the beginning there where the fact that Sandy Stotsky and I are fighting and saying Common Core is really bad news. We were put at the end of all the people that were testifying. So we got to listen to teacher after teacher after teacher saying how wonderful everything was. The trouble is that I've been in innumerable classes in various districts that asked me to come in and evaluate. And I have seen this so often. The teacher is all enthused because the kids are responding, because she's getting active responses from these kids. And I'm looking at what the responses really are and what they really imply. And what I'm seeing is such a totally different picture. The responses tend to indicate serious problems, but these problems are these difficulties are being incorporated into the list of things these kids are thinking of as true. And so, you know, I've seen this so often, and you know, and I wish that it were possible to make an honest evaluation of what's actually going on in these classes. It would surprise you, I think.
Yeah, because, you know, then we hear differently from parents. So we've got, you know, teachers, and it's just put us in between a rock and a hard place,
right?
Kind of, and it's just
Yeah,
made it pretty difficult.
I know how this works, and I know how difficult the whole thing is. But all I can tell you is the only thing that I care about is the math.
Ms. Perez? Yes, Ms. Miller. Hold on, just Ms. Miller. Ms. Perez was first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate you coming and speaking with us, Dr. Milgram. But one thing that you just said struck me. You're here about the math. I'm here about the students and the families and supporting the education in the classroom. And when we're hearing from teachers that they're working with families to identify how students are processing their skills, that speaks volumes to me. Because in order for our students to become mathematicians, in order for them to become engineers and architects, they need to understand math. And when we hear from educators that this is supporting that process, I'm listening to that, and that means the world.
Yeah, well, what can I say? You know, if I say what I really should be saying, then I'm going to antagonize a lot of people, and so I prefer not to. Well, okay, and I'm going to be very careful about this. The big problem that I saw, and over innumerable classes that I've actually looked at in innumerable situations, Let me give you one example. It was an expensive private school system in California, and I went into a class, and the class decided, to do an example on division, to do an exercise on division, and the teacher gave them a division problem with small numbers and asked them to do it, form groups and do the problem. And one kid stood up and he said, "I've already done it, here's the answer, but I used the standard algorithm, is this okay?" And the teacher said, as the book instructed her to, she said, "It's fine if you can explain to me what was done with, why the standard algorithm worked and what was done there." And the kid it was quite clear the kid had never thought in those terms, and so the kid started answering the teacher, and the kid was fumbling around a bit. And then all of a sudden the kid saw what was actually happening, and I could see that. And the kid begins to move right in the direction of what was really going on. And the teacher turns to him and says, "You don't understand, you have to do it the way everyone else is." So later on, when I was reporting on my experiences to the administration, I mentioned there was this one class with this one kid, and this kid needed special attention because he's really able. And then I started describing the kid, so they said, "Oh, him." They knew. But that's what you see. You see that kind of thing. You see a teacher who really doesn't understand what's actually going on with the mathematics, following the suggestions in the lesson plans, and doing something that is incredibly dangerous and hurtful. And the frustration is not the teacher's fault. It is the fault of the conscious choice on the part of the education schools not to give these elementary school teachers any coursework requirement in actual content. Instead, they give them methods courses.
Ms. Miller.
What? Who?
Ms. Miller.
Oh,
Okay,
yes.
I was so caught up with that story. You can relate that as a reading expert. I relate to that too. The kind of courses, the lack of courses that the departments of education have or do not have for their teachers. Okay. As my husband used to say, it is what it is. So here we are. Okay. How can we fix it? Is it fixable? Or do we just throw our hands up and
Okay.
wait till the next update?
I really wish you hadn't asked that.
I know, but isn't that our,
Yes, of
what we're
course.
about
Of
here?
course it is. But the reason I wish you hadn't asked it is that, back when Secretary Page was the Secretary of Education, as some of you may know, I was working very closely with him. And he asked me basically that question. He asked me, well, are there any programs in the entire country which actually fix teacher content knowledge? And that's for in-service teachers, not for what should have been done in the ed school, but we have teachers in the classrooms. This is real, they're good teachers. They really need to know the content. Are there any programs, in-service development programs in the country that will actually accomplish teaching them the content? And so I went ahead and I took a fair bit of money and I went around and I tried to find out everything that was being done that actually could show some positive responses. And I found exactly 2 programs in the entire country that could do that. One was in Chicago called Sesame, and the other was the Vermont Mathematics Initiative. Now, both of them were very, very similar. They were very independent of each other. They didn't even know of each other's existence. But both of them were very similar in that they took the teachers and they ended up giving them approximately 300 contact hours with actual mathematicians. At the end of this, if the teacher lasted through it, one could actually measure real changes in student outcomes. And indeed, I use, particularly in Vermont, I paid the people in Vermont a fair bit of money to do the statistical analysis on the key teachers that had come out of the Vermont program. And that created a paper which Intel got very interested in. And Intel made a program for Summer Institute for Teachers out of it. After it was all set up, they brought me in and I looked at it and said, this is never going to work. Well, they were already committed and they went ahead with their version. The reason I knew it wouldn't work is those 300 contact hours were critical and you weren't getting 300 contact hours in the summer. And they put a lot of money into it and it didn't work.
It didn't.
It did not work. Exactly the way I predicted it would fail, it failed. You can't.
They wouldn't spend the 200.
They wouldn't spend the time and interaction with people who really know the mathematics. That has to be there in a program like that. It's expensive. It's very slow, and it's very hard to take the millions of teachers that need this kind of attention and giving it to them because we simply do not have the infrastructure to do it.
But, okay, so I hear what you're saying. But I don't think we should throw our hands up and say, hey, we can't, you know.
No, I don't
you gotta
either.
come up with an alternate.
I don't either.
Okay.
But there is no alternate as far as I can see.
There's no alternate.
It's and the ultimate thing is there some way that we can generate the infrastructure to do this sort of thing? Because nothing else seems to work. Or the alternative is get the ed schools to do a proper job of preparing these teachers. And then at least, well, you'll have a generation of teachers out there who are very variable, but those coming after them should be pretty good. They should match up well with the international.
But what can Texas do? Nothing?
These are the only options I've come up with. And so maybe you can see some others, but this is what I see.
Well, let me ask you this. Is there, if we, I know I read from one of a principal who suggested taking out the process standards and leaving them in the introduction, but taking them out of the content. Would that help?
Well, anything that isolates out the math.
Yeah, keep the math out, the process.
Yeah,
Okay.
put the process standards somewhere where you can ignore them.
Where you can ignore them, that's a good idea, okay. Because they used to be in the bottom, right? Okay, all right. So they were always there, but in.
Well, but sometimes they were better and sometimes they were worse. They weren't the same.
Okay. Wow, okay.
Now, am I free to?
Okay. All right.
I'm sorry. Yes, Ms. Cargill and Ms. Were you first, or was Martha was first? Oh, okay. Okay. Ms. Cargill, then Mr. Mercer.
Well, I just was wondering, because you know, the national panel that our commissioner put together and did the research, they used the National Math Panel research. You talked about that a little bit earlier. Why did the National Math Panel go for this conceptual understanding of math? Why?
Wait, but the National Math Panel was focused on algebra. This is the one under Bush?
Well, I know in the commissioner's draft that I have printed right here, that's one of the things listed. is that they refer to the National Math Panel.
Okay,
the
okay, okay,
benchmarks,
all right,
the
got it.
benchmarks,
Yes,
yeah.
okay, it is that national panel. Okay, my interaction with that was that I was one of the chief people to choose the people that was on it, that were on it. And I thought they did a really excellent job, and they did not. They really focused just on algebra because that was their charge. They gave a really first-rate, totally researched description of what we could do to improve our algebra courses. And I have no issues with what they came up with. But it wasn't this conceptual visual thing. It was very much a real algebra courses. And it was a listing of what the critical content was in algebra. And then they filled in a lot of the research that needed to be done. So this is a very long report.
Yeah, and it looks like there are probably about 15 resources listed, the
Yeah,
national
well,
panel.
let me assure you
The Texas National
this.
Panel used to come up with the commissioner's draft, and that's only one of about 15. I'm just wondering where the conceptual model
It
came
didn't
from
come,
originally.
the
So,
conceptual model
Yeah.
didn't come from there.
okay.
It
Well, it must have come from one of these 15 sources.
well,
Because that's when the process skills were put back
see,
at
I
the top.
wasn't involved by that point.
No, right, you weren't.
And in fact, none of us, I don't think Dick Askey could, and Askey tried to stay in any way possible involved. I don't think Askey could describe where they came from.
Mr. Mercer, did you,
I'm next,
you're done?
No, she just finished that. Wait, I'm next.
Right,
Yeah.
I was
Okay.
calling.
Thank you. I just wanted, Ms. Melton Malone had a great question beginning about how does it impact the STAR exam. And so I have two questions. The first one is from a parent who's a CPA, very, high degree of math fluency. She's been tutoring for 10 years, 3rd and 4th grade. And one comment that she had was that I'm concerned that she said that we're in the STAR test now, and Mrs. Malone has asked, I believe, about how it would impact the STAR test. She said the STAR test that was testing a particular process instead of the result. For example, it was testing a stem and leaf diagram or a strip diagram instead of the result. He said the test should not require the student to solve a specific process, but getting the right answer.
Yes.
So that's my first question. What is your thought about that? Because it leads not only to how we're teaching them, but if it goes to the STAR
Yeah.
exam,
Well,
what is your thought on that?
I mean, the parent is, I agree fully with the parent that the answer is what matters. And the process you use to get there should be correct, but it should not matter.
And my second question ties to what I'm hearing is that if the process standards two-part, if we either took them out or put them in the back is first step, but embedded, and looking at your examples, everything I read is number and operations. It can either be the student applies mathematical process or whatever, or we take that out and the student has strategies to, I can't find your example here,
Develop strategies
to identify
or
coins,
simply
pennies,
uses strategies.
But in every case you have basically where it says the student, and the clause is always applies mathematical process standards to. In every case, that's pretty much stricken out.
Yes.
So we're getting back to the meat where I want my classroom educators to be able to teach. They're deciding how to do things, not a process how to do it. But we're telling them what, like number patterns and properties for algebraic reasoning, one section for geometric shapes, one section for a number and operation. These are all first grade. But in every case, I'm seeing the common thing is to strike out that section that says applies mathematical process standards.
Well, but then within the individual substandards, a lot had to be stricken as well.
Yes, I'm seeing how it all ties together. I'm not being simplistic, but I guess what I'm hearing my teammates ask here is that if the process standards should be deleted, of the overall process standards, the ones that are now in front, which these guys are referred to, those should be deleted or moved to the back. And then secondly, is striking any reference that says apply mathematical process standards, which is telling my classroom educators how to do things, which I believe is still illegal in this state. Not only is Common Core illegal, we can tell them what to be taught, we can tell them numbers and operations, we can tell them algebraic reasoning, we can tell them geometrical shapes, but we cannot tell them a process they have to follow.
Yes, you can, I believe that's right. That's
If we do
certainly
those
what I
two things,
testified on.
If we strike the standards and then strike any reference back to those standards, it'll be 90% there. I think Mr. Rowley mentioned something like that. If we can do that, how far back are we?
Well, if you can do that, and I think that I've done it mostly, at least in those 2 grades, what you find is that you can do it, and you get standards that are straight mathematics, and you know then you've got that done. But then there's the secondary problem, namely when you strip out all of this fluff, you see the core, and the core is weak. And so it becomes obvious that the core is weak, and so you see that Texas, and it shouldn't be the case in Texas. Texas should not, in the lowest grades, be that weak. They weren't that weak when I started this game back in the late 90s. Not in the lower grades. The weakness was developed and started in maybe 8 or 9, and then went up through high school and kept getting worse. And I guess it was Dar Winnick who asked me to do that evaluation. And when I gave him that report, he said, and I think this was why I got involved, because they wouldn't have involved me if I hadn't done what I said, which was I said, okay, here's what I think you will see or should be seeing. I said, you're going to get good results because these are solid. Remember, these are the old standards. These are solid in the lowest grades. And then they start weakening and weakening until by high school they are really pretty bad. So I would expect you would see that kind of a picture in outcomes. And he told me that's exactly what we in fact do see.
So could the answer be, and I think we're looking for an answer, Ms. Miller, that if we streamline our math teaks and said the process standards are either gone or at the back, any reference in there is gone, and then take that out, and then what's left, look at those things and and which we say might be weaker, but then strengthen that, we're probably going to right. I mean, I'm concerned about calling another committee back there and all of a sudden someone slips in process standards again and we're back in the same, blackboard again. I don't want to be there.
Well, let's put it this way.
But we have those instructions where every process standard is gone and reference is gone, and then what is left, now strengthen those and give us world-class standards. Would that get us going in that right direction, sir?
Yes. Yes, if you could add in the missing math material, which is, if you could add in the missing material, then you would have fine standards. There'd be no issue. And speaking for myself, but I think also I can legitimately speak for the rest of the national mathematicians, we would help.
Oh, thank you so much, sir.
Dr. Milgram, I just wanted to ask you, there were some conclusions that were made by the National Math Panel, the 2008, that Bush put together, that National Math Panel.
Yes.
I just want to see if you are in agreement with these statements. They concluded in their report, it was put out in 2008, I guess, all-encompassing recommendations that instruction should be entirely student-centered or teacher-directed are not supported by research. If such recommendations exist, they should be rescinded. If they are being considered, they should be avoided. High-quality research does not support the exclusive use of either approach. And then they concluded that research showed conceptual understanding, computational and procedural fluency, and problem-solving skills are equally important and mutually reinforce each other. Debates regarding the relative importance of each of these components of mathematics are misguided.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that statement? So it sounds like it's not that there's a struggle in us doing the math standards that talk about apply in everyday life this, our process standards.
No.
Problems that apply in
Well,
everyday
no,
life, problem-solving methods with, planning is.
What you want to do is you don't want to focus on that.
Right,
And
that's what the math panel said, not to
and the
focus
way
on
it's going is focusing on it.
Right,
In the existing document. Sure, it is critical that you understand that math is applicable, and there are reasons for that. Sure, that's not an issue. In fact, look, frankly, I helped with that section that you just read. But the balance is wrong because the process standards that you have distort the picture.
you feel they've just, the way that they're placing the emphasis and their location and the mention each time in each of them are
Yes.
making it seem overly important and the most important. Is that?
Well, and more than that, they're not even the right standards in the end.
So you're concerned about the content in the standards not having all of the elements that it should?
Yes.
Even if you stripped out that process, the content in the standards not being
Yes.
at the level that it should be.
Ultimately, you want your kids to have a background that is actually useful to them.
Yeah. I want to make sure that members know, and I can and print up this chart for you. Math teacher sent this to me, that in second grade, we require students to recall basic facts, to add and subtract within 20 with automaticity. In third grade, we recall facts to multiply up to 10 by 10 with automaticity and recall the corresponding division facts. Use strategies and algorithms, including the standard algorithm to multiply a 2-digit number by a 1-digit number. Strategies may include mental math, partial products, commutative, associative, and
Right there,
distributive properties.
then I begin to object. I do not want to see a list of may include.
The mental
The
math for
minute you
teachers.
start doing that, you're limiting the teacher's options, and you're pushing the teacher in a specific directions.
Gotcha. And then members in fourth grade solve with fluency 1- and 2-step problems involving multiplication and division. Fifth grade, multiply with fluency 3-digit numbers and a 2-digit number. We have fluency facts that are required by grades, and it's incredibly important that is part of the instruction. It's, to me, what it looks like is, it's not an either-or thing, and that's what the National Math Panel said that you agreed with. It's not an either-or. You should be doing both. And the question is, are
Both
we...
what?
Well, when you were talking about, what I read earlier was, I've lost it. What the National Math Panel said about conceptual understanding, computational and procedural fluency, and problem-solving skills are equally important and mutually reinforcing each other.
Yes, that's
Okay.
fine.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, well, that's fine
They're not
exactly as
mutually
you said
exclusive.
it.
Right.
It's more than they're not. Well, in order to solve problems in mathematics or related areas, what you really find in real practice is you isolate, you look at the area of mathematics that's involved in solving the problem, whether it's in mathematics or it's an application, and you had better know that area cold if you want to solve a problem, either a problem in mathematics or an application. You've got to start with the content knowledge and it's got to be solid. And without that solidity of knowledge, then you will not actually be able to solve problems.
Gotcha. Any other questions of Dr. Milgram? Dr. Milgram, thank you for coming again, and I'm glad your health recovered enough that you could be with us, and we really appreciate you kind of walking us through your thoughts on this issue.
Well, I hope I've helped.
Thank you so much. Members, we need to take, okay, I didn't mention this earlier,